Ready to get back into our Father's Word here at the chapel. We're going to pick it up today, Judges chapter 18, verse 21. We invite you to get your Bible and join us if you care to. We're getting ready to have an old-fashioned Bible study here at the chapel. Well, we had quite a deal going in our last lesson. As we left off, we found Dan looking for land. And it's not because they didn't get an inheritance in the promised land. It's that they didn't claim their inheritance. They let the Amorites run them off, basically. So not only was Dan looking for land, they were looking for a new god, we saw as well, because they sent the tribe of Dan sent 5 spies out to hunt out a new place for them to live. And they came across this house of Micah, which was in Ephraim, and they found there that Micah had an ephod and a molten image, a graven image, some teraphim. He had his own priest that he'd appointed, and we made a little funny about they had 10 collection plates that hadn't gotten a lot of use toward the end of our lecture. But then when Dan came back through with 600 this time, armed for war, they asked the men that were with them, the tribe of Dan, did you know there's a graven image and a molten image and an ephod and teraphim and a priest here? And they said, well, let's go take them. And so they did. They took everything, and then the priest kind of confronted them and said, what are you guys doing there? And they said, look, do you want to be the priest of one man, or would you rather or would you rather be the priest of 600, or the tribe of Dan, for example? And the priest kind of thought to himself. He said, let's see, do I want to be the priest of one man, or do I want to die at the hand of 600 armed Danites? And he decided it was in his best interest to go ahead and stick with everything that they'd stolen and go with the tribe of Dan. And we're going to pick it up today in verse 21. My program director very astutely pointed out that I skipped that verse as we were wrapping up yesterday, so we're going to go back and pick up verse 21. Let's ask that word of wisdom in Yeshua Jesus' precious name. Father, we ask you to open eyes, open ears this day. Judges, the 18th chapter, verse 21, and it reads, so they turned, these are the 600 Danites, after they'd stolen everything out of the house of Micah, including the priest. So they turned and departed, and put the little ones and the cattle and the carriage before them. Now, we get a little information here that we didn't know. The women and children are with them, and the carriage is all their belongings, is what this means. So these Danites aren't going to stay temporarily. This is a colonization group. They've got everything with them, their wives, their children, everything, all their belongings. But they're putting, in case Micah and his neighbors, which were mentioned in the last verse before this, those who might be interested in being loyal to Micah and helping him try and avenge what the Danites did, they're going to put the women and children in the front because they're going to be moving kind of slowly because of the fact that they've got the women, children, and all their belongings, no doubt their flocks and their herds as well. And if Micah approaches them, it will be from the rear as he's catching them as they're trying to leave. And that's exactly what happens, verse 22. And when they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men that were in the houses near to Micah's house, here we have his neighbors, were gathered together and overtook the children of Dan. They caught up with them. So we got trouble brewing, verse 23. And they cried unto the children of Dan, these are those with Micah, and they turned their faces and said unto Micah, what aileth thee that thou comest with such a company? I mean, all they'd done was steal the house of Micah, everything that was in it, and their priest. 24. And he, this being Micah, said, Ye have taken away my gods, small g, which I made, and the priest, which I also made, I'll add, and ye are gone away. And what have I more? Question. And what is this that ye say unto me? What aileth thee? Are you nuts? You've wronged me by stealing everything out of the house of Micah. 25. And the children of Dan said unto him, remember now, the Dan has got quite a group. There's 600 that are all armed for war. And the children of Dan said unto him, Let not thy voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows run upon thee, and thou lose thy life with the lives of thy household. Better to lose your preacher and your idols than to lose your life. 26. I'm sure Micah about this time is evaluating the situation and sizing up the strength of the Danites, and he's probably thinking, I could go back and steal another 1,100 shekels of silver from my mom and then make more idols and graven images. And I did have my son who was my priest in the house of Micah for a while until that Levite came along. Maybe my son is still available. 26. And the children of Dan went their way. And when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back unto his house. Well, there was a time that Micah had consecrated his son to be the priest in the house of Micah. And you remember the Levite showed up, and it was son out of office, Levite in office. Now it's Levite out of office, son back in office. And after all, I can't always make more idols and graven images. 27. And they took the things which Micah had made, and the priest which he had, this is back to the Danites, and came unto Laish, unto a people that were at quiet and secure. And they smote them with the edge of the sword and burnt the city with fire. Laish, historically, the malaria capital of the world. But remember, they had sent 5 spies to check out and find this land, Laish, and they discovered that these people were very peaceable people. And they actually, I think, were probably a colony of the Zidonians, but we learned in our last lesson that they were a good distance from Zidon, and therefore too far for the Zidonians to send help to rescue them. So people who lived in peace and dwelt in commerce and trade, they weren't warriors, so to speak. So we had easy pickings here from the tribe of Dan. I mean, after all, they only sent 600, so they weren't anticipating much of a fight out of the people of Laish. 28. And there was no deliverer, in other words, for the people of Laish, because it was far from Zidon, and they had no business with any man. They were kind of isolated out there on their own. And it was in the valley that lieth by Beth Rehob, and they built a city and dwelt therein, stole the house of Micah idols, stole the house of Micah priest, killed the people of Laish and stole their land from them. Do you think God is real happy with the tribe of Dan at this point in time? The answer to that is no. And it would be this idol worship that would cost Dan and Ephraim their place in the listing of the 12 tribes of Israel as they're written in Revelation chapter 7. Now, during the millennial period, at the end of Ezekiel, they're reinstituted as tribes, but there in Revelation chapter 7, the tribes of Levi and Joseph are substituted for Ephraim and Dan. Again, the reason they're left out because of this idolatry. 29. And they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, the son of Jacob, the patriarch of the tribe of Dan, their ancestor, who was born unto Israel, same as Jacob. God changed Jacob's name to Israel. Howbeit the name of the city was Laish at the first. Now, Dan would be one of the locations after the nation split into the 10 tribes of Israel to the north, and Judah, after the nation split, the 10 tribes to the north had their first king, Jeroboam. And you may recall from our studies in Kings and also Chronicles that Jeroboam, his claim to fame was that he made 2 golden calves, and he put one in Dan, this location we're studying here. Obviously, they were very receptive to idolatry. They'd had an early start at it, as we see here, and also one of the golden calves in Bethel, and said, you don't have to go down to Jerusalem to worship Yahweh. Here he is right here in the form of these golden calves. In fact, I made 2 of them for you so you wouldn't have to travel very far to worship him. Jeroboam was also good about appointing his own priests. The only problem was they weren't appointed by God nor gifted of God. Verse 30, and the children of Dan set up the graven image, the one they had stolen from the house of Micah. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. Now, some scholars try to say the captivity of the land refers to the captivity to the Assyrian. The captivity to the Assyrian, though, was centuries after this particular time this history is being written. I think the captivity that this is referring to refers to when the Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant in the time of Samuel. Remember, we backed up in time here. We're back around 1400 BC. Now, if you have a companion Bible, you have a note on this word Manasseh here. And it's interesting that this Manasseh is one of only 4 words in the entire Bible that the letter, one of the letters in the word, now I'm not talking in English, I'm talking about in Hebrew, is a suspended letter. It's also called, known as a hanging letter by some. But in other words, you would have on one line the letters of this word Manasseh in the Hebrew language, but the Hebrew letter Nun, which is roughly equivalent to our letter N, as in Nancy, is raised up off of the line. In other words, it's suspended above, and this is done so the original writers, it's known that the word has been changed from the original manuscripts. And if you remove the letter N from this word that is translated Manasseh here, it is Moses. And it's believed that some of the translators protecting the name of Moses, because Moses certainly had a son named Gershom who would have been about this age, and then Jonathan would have been Moses' grandson. That certainly would have fit with the time of the age of Moses when they went into the promised land to the time that we are here. So important, not really, but interesting if nothing else. Verse 31. And they set them up Micah's graven image, which he made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. And Shiloh means peace or rest, and that's indeed where the Mosaic tabernacle was for many, many years, in Shiloh. However, there would not be any peace or rest in Israel while this idolatry is going on. And that's the reason that God brought enemies against Israel to oppress them, because they just would not do things His way. and you don't do things his way, expect cursings. But then they'd cry out, and God would raise up a judge to deliver them over and over again. We saw it through this book. Now we come to chapter 19, and I want to take a little home assignment, and I want you to make a note of Hosea chapter 9, verses 6 through 9. And what you'll find there is prophecy of what it's going to be like just before Jesus Christ returns as King of Kings and Lord of Lords at the second advent. In Hosea chapter 9, verse 9, it states it's going to be just like in the days of Gibeah. And that's what we're going to be studying in chapter 19, is what was going on in the days of Gibeah. If we learn that, we'll know what's going to be going on just before Christ returns, as it states there in Hosea 9:9, when he will remember iniquity and visit the sin upon those who committed the sin. So what's it going to be like just before Christ returns? Chapter 19, verse 1. And it came to pass in those days, and these days referred to here are the same days referred to in chapter 18, verse 1 of Judges, shortly after the death of Joshua. While Joshua remained alive and those who served with Joshua, they did a good job of keeping the people of Israel away from idolatry. But as soon as that generation was dead, here they went running to the gods of the other nations. When there was no king in Israel, there wasn't a leader, I'll add, there wasn't a judge in Israel to set things right and rule. And again, when there's no king, the people start wandering, looking for something, a new religion, if you will. And it explains the unlawlessness of the people. And there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. And once again, we see the Levites and the priest are unoccupied. There's no work for them. They're looking for something to do, and which is an indication that the church, if you will, the tabernacle has fallen in disarray. And when you leave God out and you lose him, you've lost a great deal. Now, this concubine in the Hebrew language is palamor, and it means secondary. And at the time of this writing, it was legal for a man to take a secondary wife, and they were known as concubines, as it's translated into English. But again, we see the house of God neglected. What else is new? You think that's just the only time that it happened here in the book of Judges? I submit to you the house of God is neglected today as well. Very few people are teaching the Word of God chapter by chapter, verse by verse. Verse 2. And his concubine, the Levite's concubine, played the whore against him, and went away from him unto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there 4 whole months. Now, some commentators, scholars think that she actually was unfaithful to him, and therefore went back to her father in Bethlehem, Judah. If you have the opportunity or the means to check out this word whore in the Septuagint, you would find that it says that this woman left him not a whore. In other words, she just got homesick and went home to her father. Now, we're going to be talking about days here, and I want you to consider these days as being symbolic of the various dispensations, or we might even call them trumps to a certain extent, because some of the dispensations, if you consider the first earth and heaven age, come out with the trumps as well. But bear that in mind as we work our way. I'll be covering that with you and helping you sort your way through it if you don't know what I'm talking about. Verse 3, and her husband, this is the Levite, arose and went after her to speak friendly unto her, and to bring her again, having his servant with him, and a couple of asses. We see he's confident that she's going to come home with him because he's bringing transportation. And she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. Now, this talk friendly to her. In other words, in the Hebrew, this means to speak affectionately to her heart. In other words, he's going back to court her and try and win her heart back again. And obviously her father in Bethlehem, Judah, wanted the marriage to be reconciled because he rejoiced to see the Levite. Verse 4, and his father-in-law, the damsel's father, retained him. This word retained in the Hebrew is to fasten up or seize. So it's actually probably a little stronger word than what we would equate to the word retained in the English. Did he literally bind him hand and foot with ropes? I don't think so, but the reason for pointing that out is that we're going to see that her father was very insistent in some cases. And he abode with him 3 days. So they did eat and drink and lodge there. And this equating to the period of time after man appeared on earth in the flesh, but there was no law at that particular time. So the period of time covering when the six-day creation was created, in other words, and we could also include with that the creation of Ha-Adam and also Eve in the Garden of Eden. The law had not been given at that period of time. Verse 5, and it came to pass on the 4th day, when they arose early in the morning, that he rose up to depart. And the damsel's father said unto his son-in-law, comfort, or in the Hebrew, strengthen thine heart with a morsel of bread, and afterward go your way. Let's have a little dinner here, and then you can depart and head back for home in Mount Ephraim, if you wish to do so. Now, the 4th day would equate to the dispensation of the law. And we see the law given in that 4th dispensation and also rejected by most. But we see her father, his father-in-law, is being pretty insistent that he stay, and we're going to see more of that. Verse 6. They sat down and did eat and drink, both of them together. For the damsel's father had said unto the man, the Levite, be content, I pray thee, and tarry all night, and let thine heart be merry. He was evidently quite fond of the Levite. And then, too, consider that people didn't travel great distances of time in a very short period of time, and therefore to travel from Bethlehem, Judah, to Ephraim, it might be several years before this man would see his daughter again. So he's trying to lengthen that out as much as possible. Verse 7. And when the man rose up to depart, the Levite, his father-in-law urged him before he lodged there again. What's one more night? You know, stay and let's eat, and I've got some special wine, and we'll make our hearts merry, and then you can get up and get an early start in the morning. Remember, the Hebrew day begins at sundown. And he arose early in the morning of the 5th day to depart. And the damsel's father said, comfort thine heart, strengthen yourself, I pray thee. And they tarried until afternoon, the day from noon getting late or in the evening. And they did eat both of them. Here we go again. Now remember, the fifth day is the period of grace, the period of time, the dispensation, and that's what a dispensation means, is simply a period of time of grace, which is the dispensation we live in at this time. After Christ paid the price on the cross, we're able to go with a repentant heart directly to our Heavenly Father and ask for forgiveness. Therefore, it's called the dispensation of grace. Now, recall, at sunset, though, is the beginning of the next day, which is the sixth day, the dispensation of Antichrist, if you will. What things are going to be like just before Jesus Christ returns, as it's written in Hosea chapter 6, verse 9. And when the man rose up to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, his father-in-law, the damsel's father, said unto him, Behold, now the day draweth toward evening. It's getting late. I pray ye, tarry all night. Behold, the day groweth to an end. Lodge here, that thine heart may be merry. And tomorrow get you early on your way, that thou mayest go home. Wait until the morning, and then you can get an early start. The Levite isn't going to go for it this time. But the man, the Levite, would not tarry that night, but he rose up and departed, and came over against Jebus, which is Jerusalem. And there were with him 2 asses saddled, his concubine, and also was with him. So here he's approaching Jebus, which is, at this time, is not Jerusalem. Jebus was occupied by Jebusites, which were a tribe of Canaan. And it was Jebus up until the time of David, which is about 450 years after the period of time that we're at now. So what we have is Canaanites living in Jebus at this time. Verse 11. And when they were by Jebus, the day was far spent. And the servant said unto his master, Come, I pray thee, and let us turn in into the city of the Jebusites, and lodge in it. His servant knew that it was dangerous to be out on the road at night. And his master, this is the Levite, said unto him, We will not turn aside hither into the city of a stranger, foreigners, Canaanites, Jebusites, that is not of the children of Israel. We will pass over to Gibeah. Gibeah should be a safe haven, a safe place to stop for the night, because it was allotted to the tribe of Benjamin. So we're talking about this town Gibeah occupied by Israelites, our own people. Verse 14. And they passed on and went their way, and the sun went down upon them. The sixth dispensation begins. What is it going to be like just before Christ returns? The sun went down upon them when they were by Gibeah, which belongeth to Benjamin. Verse 15. And they turned aside thither to go in and to lodge in Gibeah. And when he went in, he sat him down in a street, probably like the word in the New Testament where the 2 witnesses are slain rather than the street. It probably was like an open area, probably a market that had closed, of the city, for there was no man that took them into his house to lodging. Now, there wasn't a hotel on every main street in the towns at this time. If you were traveling, someone would normally offer to take you in, but in this case, nobody is offering to take them in. And behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field at evening. In other words, he was a farmer, which was also of Mount Ephraim. He wasn't a Benjamite. Remember where the Levite was sojourning. He was sojourning in Ephraim. And he sojourned in Gibeah, among the Benjamites, but the men of the place were Benjamites, not his home. Verse 17. And when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring, this being a traveler, in other words, the Levite and those with him, man in the street of the city. And the old man said, Whither goest thou, and whence comest thou? Where are you from, and where are you going? What are you doing here, sitting here in this open area? And he said unto him, We are passing from Bethlehem, Judah, toward the side of Mount Ephraim. From thence am I, and I went to Bethlehem, Judah, but now I am now going to the house of the Lord, and there is no man that receiveth me to house. Now, if he is going to the sanctuary, which was located at Shiloh at this time, he's going in the wrong direction. Maybe the house of Micah had become so well known in Ephraim that that's what he's talking about. I don't know. Verse 19. Yet there is both straw and provender for our asses, the Levite continues. And there is bread and wine also for me, and for thy handmaid, and for the young man which is with thy servants. There is no want of anything. We have everything that we need, and all we need is a roof over our head. We have everything that we need to take care of ourselves. In other words, we won't be much trouble to you at all if you could but take us in. Verse 20. And the old man said, Peace be with thee, or welcome, in other words. Howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me, only lodge not in the street. In other words, let me provide for your needs, including for your animals. And you save all that, you may need it at a later time. And note the old man, though, is very aware that it's dangerous out there on the streets of Gibeah. And at all costs, he does not want them staying there. One more verse and we'll stop for the day. 21. So he brought him into his house and gave provender unto the asses, and they washed their feet and did eat and drink. A very generous host, but again, he knows what goes out on the streets, what happens on the streets in Gibeah. You're not going to believe what happens when we come back in our next lecture. Just in the days of Gibeah, that's how it's going to be before Christ returns. Things get worse before they get better. Got a short message. We'll ask you to listen a moment, won't you please?